well. And I see that we have like a wonderful variety of women here today. We've got artistic women, obviously we have musical women, we have young women, we have more seasoned women, I'm sure we have athletic women, and I have to tell you, I am probably the most athletically challenged woman in this room. I would be shocked if I'm not. I have some physical issues that make sports kind of dangerous for me, but the real issue is that I'm really, really uncoordinated and totally unathletic, and I have no mechanical reasoning whatsoever. I can barely navigate a fork to my mouth without leaving puncture marks in my chin. I mean, that's how bad it is. So I got to change the angle here because my tablet doesn't like it. There we go. So when someone challenged me to take the risk of jumping off a blob at a family camp, a few years ago, my lizard brain screamed, "No, don't do it. You'll be maimed and spend the rest of your life with painting pottery with a brush, clenched between your teeth." But did I listen? No. Why? Pride. It was pride. You see, I love the beach and the water, and I'm not afraid to get in there and really enjoy it, but I generally pretty much put on a full face and do my hair and put on earrings before I go to the beach. I don't do it to impress anyone. I just do it because I feel better when I put in a little bit of effort to make myself look good. So people sometimes jump to conclusions about me, like that I'm some kind of a princess who won't risk having any fun, for fear of getting her makeup smudged. So this is why when I was invited to jump off the blob, I ignored the wise part of my brain and I let pride rule. Now, let me explain to you what a blob is, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about. It's a huge inflatable sausage that's anchored to the bottom of the lake. And the idea is that when somebody jumps off the tower onto the blob, it sort of acts like an airbag for that person. And then that person climbs out to the end of the sausage, and the next person jumps, and it suddenly becomes a catapult that launches the victim into a graceful arc, the apex of which grazes low Earth orbit, before gravity wins and splashdown occurs in the lake. Okay, have you got a visual of what this is like? Apparently, it's quite a lot of fun when done correctly. I wouldn't know. The correct technique depends on which level of the tower that you jump from. There's usually a low tower and a higher tower. Now, people on the lower tier stand at the very back of the platform and take a running leap off the tower onto the blob. I'd never really paid attention to the fact that people jumping from the top of the tower generally go right to the front edge so that they can actually see the target floating in the water below them. Well, of course, I chose the top tower because, well, pride. And I resolutely climbed the blob tower and took a running leap off the platform right from the very back. But because I couldn't really see exactly where the blob was when I launched myself, I landed at a rather awkward angle on my face. I did a brief lip stand on the sort of the side of the blob before I ricocheted off into the water. And you're wondering how I know I did a lip stand? Because I left a perfect set of lipstick prints on the side of the blob with trail marks going off into the water, skid marks. My neck has never been the same. So I want to start our day off together by talking about taking risks. Not the crazy activity kind, like the hang glider I met earlier today, but the kind that God invites us to take. And I want to address this question: how can I get out of my comfort zone and do the things that I dream of doing? I think most of us feel really inspired by the lives of people who make a real difference in the world. Like Nelson Mandela, who chose forgiveness over revenge after 27 years of imprisonment and injustice. Martin Luther King, who lived and died to secure the civil rights of African Americans. Mother Teresa, who spent her life serving those who were literally dying of poverty. These are three of my heroes. But really, more than heroes, they're kind of like superheroes, aren't they? You know, because we really admire them, but we sort of can't relate to them. It feels like they must have had some kind of superpower not available to the rest of us. And I think maybe the seeming unattainability of the character and the calling that these kinds of people demonstrated is maybe the reason that sometimes we're more inspired by stories of ordinary people who take a risk and do something extraordinary. People who are just living their lives, going about their business, and through some interruption in their routine, felt called to step up and change something for the better. And then comes the remarkable part. They actually did it. Most people think of themselves as ordinary, and other people are extraordinary, right? Can you relate to that? But the truth is that no one is ordinary, no one. We are each unique and special, and we all have something important to contribute to the world. Our ordinary lives can have deep significance when we live intentionally and take risks, but they become extremely superficial if we don't. It just happens without our permission. Our default mode is to mind our own business and fly under the radar. A few years ago, I found myself attending the funeral of a woman I didn't know. I was there because she was the common law partner of a relative of my husband's, and we just wanted to show him our support. The woman's daughter instructed the funeral home to prepare food for 200 people. 40 attended. During the service, there was an open mic, and everyone present, all 40 of us, were invited to come and share memories or tributes about the deceased woman. Well, there were a lot of awkward silences between the 3 people who took the opportunity to say something. The deepest thoughts expressed about this woman were that she could grow anything, she sported a great suntan, and she sometimes helped her grandson with his homework. I thought that was just so incredibly sad. Over 60 years lived with little more to show for it than a garden that would soon be overtaken with weeds and a faded suntan. If it weren't for the time she helped her grandson with his homework, there would have been no significant legacy at all. It does not have to be that way. No matter how old or young you are, you don't want to leave such an empty legacy. I know you don't. You and I want to be known and remembered as lovers of people, changers of destiny, givers of hope. So, what's stopping us? Well, first of all, I think we're distracted. Life is complicated and we're busy, right? It's really hard to make intentional choices. We tend to just make decisions about whatever's screaming for our immediate attention. Thinking about other people requires real intentionality. My husband Randy comes from a family of storytellers. At family dinners, the Carters love to sit around the table and relive family folklore, the funny ones especially. And they laugh until the tears course down their faces and their full stomachs ache. And these stories never lose their comedic value. Each time they are told and retold, they laugh just as hard as they did the first 20,000 times they were told. Now, it seems that my father-in-law is the main source of the raucous laughter in more than his fair share of these stories. One of the all-time favorites is the time that the family made their weekly Friday night pilgrimage to the supermarket. At the time, they were a one-car family, and my father-in-law took the car to work all week, so Friday, this was a big deal. Everybody went to Woodward's food floor. That's going back a ways, hey? So the weekly trip was a family activity. Randy was about 12. His little brother was just a little guy. It was wintertime and bitterly cold outside, like -40 kind of cold outside. Well, they arrived home with a car full of groceries and parked the car in the back lane behind the house. Everyone loaded up and traipsed through the snow and the ice to the back door. Randy's dad stayed behind to bring the last load and lock the car. His hands were full, and he struggled to angle himself so that he could kind of hip check the car door closed. The problem was that this hula-type maneuver it took to connect hip with door caused the hemline of his knee-length leather coat to swing back inside the passenger compartment of the car at the precise second that the door closed, locking into place. He was trapped, out in the dark, in the cold, no hat or gloves, unable to put down what was in his hands to reach his car keys to unlock the door. And alone. Well, he thought as he shivered, someone will notice that I haven't come into the house. Surely one of them will miss me. But Randy was already sidetracked with the TV. His mom was putting away the groceries, and his little brother was playing with a new toy. No one noticed. His family was busy with other things. They assumed he was in another room in the house if they thought of him at all. Well, as you know, being good Canadians, it only takes a couple of minutes in that kind of cold for exposed flesh to freeze. His fingers started getting numb. Still, he waited, absolutely confident one of them would come. 5 minutes passed. Muscles starting to cramp, prevented from moving by this short leash that was his coat. 10 minutes. Nobody is coming, he realized, feeling quite miffed. He tried calling, but allegedly the TV and the other noise in the house drowned him out. How is it possible they can't hear me, he thought. He tried wiggling out of his coat. No, not possible. There was nothing to do but yank the coat out of the door by force, destroying the leather. That was not a happy man when he arrived in the house, huffing and puffing. Have I so little value to this family that no one cared or noticed that I was outside freezing in the dark? Didn't anyone hear me bellowing? I yelled at the top of my lungs for 10 minutes. I'm surprised nobody called the police. And look at this coat. He was so incensed. I had to ruin my new coat. The family still thinks this is hilarious. And to this day, they maintain that they never heard him or noticed his absence. It's kind of an apt analogy, actually, because we're sidetracked by our technology, distracted by the basic tasks of living, and preoccupied with our own pleasure. We aren't thinking of the needs of others and how to meet them. We're consumed with caring for ourselves, our families, and meeting our own goals. And we're not trying to be selfish. We're just doing what comes naturally. And that, my friends, is the problem. In his letter to the Philippians, the Apostle Paul says, "Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too." So we're distracted. Sometimes we're also dumbfounded. I know it's a weird word, but I'm an author, and the alliteration thing, I just have to do it. I just can't help myself. So we're dumbfounded. We don't know where to start. Even once our attention is drawn to the fact that we're preoccupied with our own lives, we still don't know what to do. We feel stuck, just like we got our coat caught in the car door. Getting unstuck requires a paradigm shift. It means living with an awareness of what's going on around you and taking responsibility for it. For example, did you know that child sexual slavery is more rampant in the world today than at any other time in history? Are you okay with that? I'm sure you're not. You weren't alive when African Americans were enslaved. I wasn't alive then either. There's nothing that we can do about that. But I imagine, like me, you're pretty glad that there were people who stepped up and did something about it then. Child sex slavery is happening on our watch. There are things we can do about that, and there are hundreds of other issues equally deserving of our attention. There is good that needs doing. And as Jesus' representatives in the world, it's our responsibility. So I want to get really practical. Here are some things that we can do to get unstuck. First of all, get educated. Research the issues that tug at your heart or ignite your indignation. Find out what NGOs or ministries are tackling that particular problem. Personally, I choose Christian organizations because I want to do what I'm doing in Jesus' name. because I'm doing it as his representative. Secondly, get involved. Find out from the websites of the ministries that resonate with you what they need done. It might be writing letters to officials. It could be doing administrative work, raising money, sponsoring a child, or many other things. And thirdly, get dirty. I love the way Salvation Army Captain Danielle Strickland talks about this. She worked for years in East Vancouver, in the poorest zip code postal code in Canada. And she said, if Febreze is not your main ministry tool, you are not doing it right. Take the risk of entering into the untidy world of human need. Serve food to the homeless. Walk with a girl through a crisis pregnancy. Go on a mission trip and see the nurse needs firsthand, and then come back and stay engaged. If the need you're passionate about isn't being addressed in your area, then start a new work. If God is placing this on your heart, then he'll bring others along to help you. It really doesn't have to be complicated. Carrie Jo is such a great example of this kind of risk-taking. She wore a gunny sack for a prom dress by her own choice. Her mom said Carrie Jo's always seen the world kind of differently. It's like she was born with a third eye, and I don't mean like the yoga, Eastern mysticism kind of third eye, but just like sort of an extra perception. And that extra perception gives her a broader than normal perspective on the events of her life, big and small. So when her high school graduation approached, she was troubled by the amount of money that some of her peers were spending on a dress for one occasion, albeit a special one. The importance that her peers were assigning to their appearance for one night really saddened Carrie Jo. It seemed like they were looking to sequins and satin for their intrinsic value. Now, Carrie Jo likes to dress up as much as any young woman, but she saw an opportunity, not only to challenge the belief system of her high school and her broader community, but to raise awareness for needs of young women living in the developing world. She thought of all that could be accomplished with the collective cash being shelled out on prom dresses, updos, and manicures. And she decided to make a statement. So through a friend, she found the perfect opportunity to invest in a new vocational school for girls in Niger, specifically for girls who are in danger of being married off extremely young or ending up in the sex trade. She told her family and friends that if she could raise $10,000 for her cause, she would wear burlap to her grad. Well, the campaign went viral. And in the end, Carrie Jo far exceeded her goal, raising enough money to fund the entire school, including supplies and tuition and even the cook's salary for an entire year. And at her prom, she was the smartest looking girl there. Carrie Jo's perception changed her paradigm. Instead of choosing what would make her look glamorous and feel good for one evening, she chose what would make her look outward and feel great for her whole life. Rather than ending the festive occasion with a dress in storage and a few photos, she ended it knowing that the entire lives of a whole class of young women were forever changed. And in fact, not only were their lives going to be changed, but the cycle of poverty could be broken, potentially affecting generations. And then also because of the influence of Jesus-loving teachers at this school, she realized even their eternity could potentially be changed. What a great example Carrie Jo is to us, who are so distracted, who so often feel dumbfounded, and I think often feel we're deficient. Now, for some people, it's that feeling of insignificance, of not really having the ability or the personality to accomplish anything meaningful. It all feels so big and overwhelming. We look at our little collection of gifts and experiences and knowledge, and we think, what can I possibly do that would make a lasting difference? And we allow that sense of overwhelmingness of the enormity of the world's problems to prevent us from doing something for someone. I enjoy swimming lengths for fitness as much as I enjoy anything that is related to fitness. And one day I was swimming beside or with a man who thrashed around so violently in the water that every time we passed, he swamped me, and I ended up with a lungful of water. I thought, I have never seen anyone swim that spastically. Like, he swam so violently, I thought he must be missing a limb to have developed such a spastic stroke. So I kept an eye on him while I was swimming so that I could hold my breath every time he passed, but also so I could do kind of a brief inventory of his body parts to just see if he had, all the appendages that you need for swimming. Well, when he got out of the pool, I was amazed to see that he had all of his body parts, or at least the ones that I could see that were important for swimming. I mean, he may have had an appendix out or something, but I thought, well, whatever he lacks in finesse, he definitely makes up for in passion. I think a lot of us feel, when it comes to offering ourselves completely to God for his work in the world, like we're missing a limb. Like we're inadequate, like we don't have everything we need to, do whatever it is that is on our heart to do. And because we don't feel adequate or capable, we give ourselves permission to just sit on the edge of the pool instead of jumping right in. We may really believe that we have nothing of worth to offer God. And maybe we think we're too damaged, or too uneducated, or too introverted. And we allow our fear of failure, or sometimes even just our fear of fear, to justify merely storing the assets that God has entrusted to us. I was deeply touched by a video that I saw on the internet of a Chinese dance pair that were performing this beautiful contemporary dance to some very moving, emotional music. I was struck by the mood, the emotion that was created by this dance, and the graceful, beautiful movements of the couple. And it wasn't until I'd watched the video for a couple of seconds that I suddenly noticed the young woman was missing an arm. And I watched several more minutes, and I realized the man is missing a leg. And yet they danced with such expressive grace. Their disabilities really seemed very unimportant. I was so moved by this video that after watching it several times, went on the internet and I did some research about this couple. Turns out the woman, Ma Li, had been a ballet dancer since she was just a little girl. And at the age of 17, she was accepted into a very prestigious art school. And it looked like she was going to be launching an amazing career. But just 2 years later, she was involved in a very serious car accident, and as a result, lost her right arm. And she really thought she had no choice but to give up dance. And there's more to the story, but eventually she heard about a 20-something-year-old man named Zhao Wei who had lost his entire left leg in a farming accident when he was a little boy. He grew up learning how to do almost everything a different, more difficult way. Well, when Ma Li and Zhao Wei met, she saw his athletic frame, and she invited him to dance. He had never been a dancer. How in the world was he going to dance with one leg? But she was relentless, and eventually he agreed. She began instructing him, and it was hard. They trained for 12 hours a day. And he got so frustrated that twice he quit. But there was something about it that just kept drawing him back. Eventually, they hired a choreographer to design routines, especially for them, and in 2007, they entered the Chinese Central Television Modern Dance Competition. Their version, I guess, of So You Think You Can Dance. And on April 20th, they won the silver medal. Why am I telling you this story? Because there are two things I'd really love for you to remember. The first is this: we are all damaged. Every single one of us. We all have scars and insecurities. We are all deficient in some way. The question is whether we're going to allow whatever it is we lack to keep us from offering what we do have to God for the sake of the world. You and I are broken and damaged. Let's dance anyway. Secondly, we all have assets. We all have a certain amount of discretionary time. We each have a unique collection of life experiences, gifts, and abilities. We have varying amounts of money that we could assign to doing something good. We have our passion, that intense emotional energy. Now, we can store or squander these assets, or we can use them to create a life that we can be proud of, an exciting life full of passion. Now, almost everybody here, I'm sure, knows the story of David and Goliath, and I think David is such a great example of this passionate abandon. I mean, he wasn't exactly known in his youth for being a bold warrior or, a fierce leader. His father saw him as so insignificant that when the prophet came looking for the next king among Jesse's boys, his dad didn't even bother to call him in from the field. When Saul mustered an army to fight the Philistines, David didn't qualify for the draft. He was left behind with Inky, Pinky, and Puffy while his older brothers went off to fight. Clearly, when people thought of David, they did not think of military might. Here's something we learned from David. We are not the heroes of our own stories. Jesus is. He doesn't expect us to have everything we need to mend the gaping holes in the fabric of the world. He just wants us to offer what we have. For David, that was just a slingshot. But God will provide everything we need to do what he asks us to do. It really isn't about us. Taking risks requires courage. Ambrose Redmoon said it this way: courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear. Was David afraid? I'm pretty sure he was. But he saw wrong that needed righting. He said, "Who is this pagan Philistine anyway that he's allowed to defy the armies of the living God? Like, that's not right. We can't let that stand." Representing Jesus in the world, taking risks and dreaming dreams does not mean we will never be afraid. It will mean stepping out of our comfort zones. It will mean taking things on that are beyond our natural abilities. I could tell you quite a few stories from my own life involving my fear and God's gentleness, my inadequacy and God's greatness. But one of the most stretching stories in my life was the birth and launching of the 10 Smart Things course. It's a, pardon me, it's a video study that came out of my passion to help our church, my own church, engage women with limited exposure to the teachings of Jesus. I wanted to offer them the opportunity to come to faith. When we ran this course that I wrote for the first time, we saw women come through the doors of our church that we had never seen before, and many of them came to faith. And I began to see that if this tool was anointed by God like that in our church, if it was being used like that, then maybe there were other places that God might want to use it. It became clear to my husband and me, and eventually the board of our ministry, that God wanted us to take a huge leap of faith and develop this material in a way that it could be shared with other churches and ministries. Eventually, Harvest House Publishers published the course material in a book that has literally made its way around the world. And I've got it out there on my table. It's called 10 Smart Things Women Can Do to Build a Better Life. But early in that project, my faith was stretched almost to the breaking point. I felt so overwhelmed and so alone. And I remember clearly one day when my initial excitement over the project had given way to, I don't know, I think we'd have to call it despair. I don't think that's too strong a word. The quotes for all the work to be done, like editing and packaging, were coming in much faster than the money, and the stack of tasks to be done, most of which I had no idea how to do, towered over my faith. I was so discouraged this day that the icing on the cake was that the original video producer that I had hired went all diva on me and decided he wanted royalties from the project, and that caused the whole thing to screech to a halt. So I went to my Bible, desperate for some encouragement. I opened to where I had been reading, which happened to be in Zechariah. And I've got to tell you, I was pretty skeptical that there was going to be anything encouraging for me in Zechariah. But nevertheless, I prayed for fresh faith and I began to read. And I will never forget reading these words found in chapter 4, verse 10. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. And then just a little bit further down the page, this is what the Lord says. Take heart and finish the task. Now, even though I realized that these words were originally written to someone else who was overwhelmed with a daunting task, I also knew just as surely they were God's words for me in that moment. And so I put my head down and got back to work. And the amazing way we saw God's hand in this project was nothing short of miraculous. The thousands of dollars we needed to complete the project came in just a few months. We saw his hand as professionals in the publishing industry, like editors and book designers offered their services either at discounted rates or completely free because they believed in the project and they wanted to see it. They wanted to be part of it. Listen to this email that I got from the book designer. And by the way, I didn't even know I needed a book designer. I didn't even know book designers existed. I'm not talking about graphic design. I'm talking about text design. Who knew? One of the many things I did not know. But anyway, this book designer sent this email to my editor and CC'd me on it. And it says, Hi, Dawn. Here is the design for the Smart Things Guide. I hope you and Donna enjoy this design as much as I do. I really feel that Jesus is standing right behind me when I work on this. Sometimes I can almost see a hand over my right shoulder, pointing at the screen, directing the work. Thank you for bringing this project to me, Daniel. This man, whom I've still never met, was thanking us for the opportunity to work on the project for free. What an exciting, humbling, terrifying experience it was to be so far out of my comfort zone that I clung to God like a life preserver on the Titanic, and in turn to be reminded of his faithfulness, his provision, and care. I often feel like I'm in over my head. I mean, what am I doing up here in front of all of you? And yet, when I take on risks that God puts in front of me, I realize how desperately I need God. Conversing with him regularly about every facet of our lives stretches our faith and draws us closer to him. And seeing how he answers prayer for those God-sized assignments that we take on for him shows us that his fingerprints are all over them. What a rush to be able to step off a cliff with nothing but the bungee cord of our faith anchoring us to God. And then watching how he uses those faith-stretching circumstances to grow us, to bless others, and to honor himself. There are no ordinary people. Acting on that truth will launch you into a life you can love. We have an opportunity this weekend to put feet to our faith. There's a compassion table out there, and we've stocked it with beautiful little faces from the Dominican Republic because we know that that's something that is special to the hearts of the people of this church. And I just want to share with you, I sponsor 5 kids. I've had the opportunity to meet them all, and it's been just such an amazing experience. I went to El Salvador with a group of women who were friends of mine a number of years ago, about 5 years ago, I guess. And before I went, I made a phone call and asked if I could sponsor a little girl in El Salvador who had previously lost her sponsor. That happens from time to time, and it's really hard on the kids when it does. And so I was at the project. I got to meet this little girl's mom. Her name was Mercedes, and Mercedes is about the same age as my daughter. And so, it was almost like I was sponsoring a grandchild, which might be the only way I ever get grandchildren. These women over here know I've been whining about not being a grandma yet. But when I met her, I heard a heartbreaking story that when Erlene learned she had a sponsor, this little 5-year-old girl, she couldn't wait to get a letter from her sponsor. She waited and waited, and other kids were getting letters, and she wasn't getting one. And when that letter finally came, she was so excited. And she opened it, and instead of pictures of her sponsor's family and news about their lives, It said, "I'm so sorry, I will not be able to be your sponsor anymore." And Arlene was devastated. And so I took Mercedes' hands in mine and I looked into her eyes and I said, "I will not do that. I will not quit on Arlene." And her eyes flooded with tears and she launched herself into my arms. Later that day, we went and visited her in her home, tiny, tattered little home, and Grandma was there. And Grandma eyed me suspiciously. And I wondered what that was about. And then there was this little burst of Spanish between the mom and the grandma. Oh, hello. And then suddenly at the end of this little conversation, the grandma turned and beamed this huge smile at me. And then it was translated for me, and the conversation had gone like this: "She better not disappoint Arlene like that last sponsor did." And Mercedes said, "Oh, she won't, Mom. She's already promised me." What could I possibly do with $41 a month that would be worth more than the trust of that mother, the hope of the grandmother, or the joy of her child? You'll have an opportunity to sponsor a child should you choose today, and maybe that's the way that God is going to invite you to take a bit of a risk. If you do choose to sponsor a child today, we're going to be happy to give you a copy of one of my books as a little gift. I'd like to invite the band up now as we finish. Just 2 months ago, or not even, 2 months ago, January, I was in Nicaragua and I had the chance to do a home visit. I was talking with another family, a single mom who had 3 children in the Compassion Program. And we asked the oldest daughter, a little girl named Yodeline, who is about 12, what would she like to say to her sponsor if she was in the same room with her sponsor? And she couldn't seem to formulate a response, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then we realized she, too, had lost her sponsor. So my husband kind of stood up next to me and said, "Should we sponsor her?" You know, it's good to talk as a couple before you have another child. And I said, "Of course." So we got to tell her that we were going to be her sponsor, and she just lit up like a Christmas tree. I took off the necklace I was wearing and put it around her neck and told her, "When you look at this, you remember that there's someone in Canada who loves you and who prays for you and who cares for you." Would you help us finish this session? Thank you.